try to have like a session regarding key recommendations for engagement of persons with disabilities. And we will be having today our fantastic speakers, most of them that are part of the Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network and have really a very important work of advocacy in the regions. Uh, in, and having said that, I would like to maybe start with our first speaker, uh, Greta Gamberini, who will be talking about Introduction to Global Disability Summit and its component. Greta leads the GDS Secretariat. She is in charge of coordinating activities and advocacy efforts. She has 5 years of experience in disability inclusive development. She previously worked with EDF and ADD International, and she holds a master's degree in law. Uh, Greta, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosario, for the introduction and for leading on this webinar. And thanks to all of you attending today. We really appreciate you taking the time to attend and engage in this webinar. As Rosario mentioned, I will be giving an overview of what the Global Disability Summit is. My connection today has been really poor, so I'm going to turn my camera off while I speak because I want to make sure that you can hear me without any interruptions. But I wanted to introduce myself on a camera first. As Rosario mentioned, we are here today to talk about the Global Disability Summit, which will happen on April 2nd and 3rd in Berlin, Germany, and will be co-hosted by the International Disability Alliance and the governments of Germany and Jordan. On April 1, so one day before the Global Disability Summit, we will have a civil society forum, which will be a day dedicated to civil society to discuss their global priorities and how they connect to the Global Disability Summit. Now, the Global Disability Summit is a global mechanism that has the objective to raise global efforts to address disability inclusion. Our primary objective with the next Global Disability Summit is to build and expand on the results of the previous GDSs, which were held in 2018 and 2022. We want to do this by amplifying the impact that the events in 2018 and 2022 had, and reflecting on what didn't work so that we can do better for the next one. The summit, through activities that are happening before the event in Berlin and hopefully after, has the objective to create opportunities for collaboration among governments, OPDs, civil society, private sector, and a lot of other stakeholders by fostering, so creating opportunities for a unified approach to disability inclusion and to the submission of commitments. And we will speak about commitments in the second segment of our webinar today, so I will not go into details now. When it comes to concrete aspects of the Global Disability Summit, we of course understand that the main interest right now is on the program of the Global Disability Summit and different opportunities for engagement. The program is currently available online, and we also have a plain text version of the program. I will put in the chat box our email, and I will also share the plain text version of the program for those interested. We shaped this program based on a series of consultations which were run by the International Disability Alliance in many countries over the world and in the past 2 years. The consultations wanted to understand what the priorities of persons with disabilities were for the Global Disability Summit, and what it was important that we focused on when it came to the GDS program and areas. We presented the results of these consultations to the co-hosts of the summit, and based on this report, we drafted the program of the GDS. For each of the thematic sessions, we have a focus on implementation. What does this mean? It means that we want each of the thematic sessions to show actionable outcomes when it comes to disability inclusion and innovative practices to address the challenges that are faced by persons with disabilities. We also want a way in which we can turn these outcomes into concrete actions. And this is why we have a focus on commitments. As I mentioned, we're also looking at innovative practices. So I encourage all of you today, tomorrow, to look at the program and to look at the topics that are in the program and to contact us if you think your organization or an organization that you know of may have good practices that they're working on and that should be shown during the Global Disability Summit. Another way in which you can engage is to submit a proposal to host a side event or a fireside chat, or to apply to have an exhibition space. We, of course, don't expect OPDs to be doing this by themselves. We encourage you to, reach out to relevant partners or to ask us whether anyone is looking for partners for these events. When I speak about fireside chats, what we mean with this is smaller spaces for conversation, which have an audience of roughly 30 people, and that will last 45 minutes, that can focus on a very specific topic or, for example, on the launch of an interesting report. And this would be a great space where to have very specific conversations. We currently have a call for application that is open until the 16th of December to apply for all of these different events. finally, as I think this is what's of most interest to anyone, registration to the Global Disability Summit is open and is free of charge. However, registering for the Global Disability Summit does not grant funding to attend the Global Disability Summit. The International Disability Alliance has received a small but consistent amount of funding to sponsor OPDs and persons with disabilities to attend the Global Disability Summit. We published a call for nomination last month, which closed about 2 weeks ago. And we are now in the process of evaluating the candidates that we have received. Our aim for 2025 is to ensure that underrepresented groups are taken into consideration and that are duly represented at the GDS. So we currently have a quota in place for youth with disabilities, as well as for indigenous groups. So we will specifically be looking at candidates that fall within these two groups. We also, of course, want to ensure that gender and regional balance are well taken into consideration. We'll hopefully have a final list of people that will be funded through the IDA funding to attend the GDS. We're, of course, also looking at other forms of funding to see whether we can receive further support and to be able to communicate whether there are other organizations that are funding people to attend the GDS. Rosario, I think I'll stop here in case there are questions. I think as Rosario mentioned, feel free to use the Q&A box or to raise your hand whether you have questions so that we can ensure that everyone is given an opportunity to be listened to.
Okay, thank you so much, Greta. Yes, this is the time that you have to make questions. I think for maybe some of you, talking about Global Disability Summit is a little bit new. That's why maybe it's very important to ask as many questions as you have. I don't know if someone wants to raise their hands or maybe wants to write something in the chat on the Q&A.
Thanks, Rosario. There's only
that's what, okay.
Sorry, there's only a question in the Q&A box, which is about Portuguese interpretation, and I'm sorry to communicate that we do not have a Portuguese interpretation. And then I don't see any hand raised for now.
Yes, I'm very sorry for not having a Portuguese interpretation. We try to prioritize at least 3 or 4 languages. In this case, we prioritize Spanish, French, but also Swahili and Nepali. And I don't know if the interpreters finally came or not, because we had some delay with interpreters in Nepali and Swahili. But anyway, I'm sorry for that.
I now see a hand raised, Rosario, from Rocchiatu. I've asked them to unmute themselves if they want to take the floor.
Yes, please, Rocchiatu. I don't know if the mic is on or not yet. Please let me know. Great. Yeah.
Thanks, Rosario. No, oh, now it's on.
Yes, no, okay, okay. Okay, please go ahead with your questions or your comments.
Oui, Rukiatou est prête maintenant. Hello?
Yes,
Do you hear me? This is Dokiatou.
we can hear you now.
C'est concernant toujours l'interprétation.
About interpreting, we understood the last time that we would have interpreting in a language sign, in English and French, and I would like to know if we have an interpreter for a sign language in French. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
C'est difficile. Je vais t'aider. Je vais rester là. Tu peux m'aider.
Sorry, I don't know if someone heard the question in English because I was trying to or
yeah,
not.
sorry, Rosario. Yes, so the question was about having sign language interpretation in French sign language, and again, we apologize for any misunderstanding. We try and allow as many languages as our budget allows. We have international sign and we have closed captioning in English, but we do not have a French sign language interpretation.
Yes, and also our apologies because, I mean, we would like to have a lot of languages, more maybe than 10, 12 languages, and also sign languages, but it's very difficult also to provide these kind of things in this kind of spaces of online webinars because you know that especially for sign language we need to have different, not only for regions but especially for countries. That's why if we want to maybe implement sign language, we need to have more than 100 sign languages, different sign language. Anyway, but thank you so much, especially for raising this inquiry, this question. We try to do our best, at least to have the minimum of accessibility features. I know that it's not completely accessible because we don't have all the languages for interpretation, especially sign language, but this is, I mean, what we can do for now. And sorry about that.
Thanks so much, Rosario. There's another question in the Q&A box, if you want me to read it out loud.
Yes, please.
So the question says, how will the Global Disability Summit ensure the representation of youth, especially Indigenous women and girls with disabilities? Rosario, maybe I can go a bit more on the practical side, and then if you want to expand
I can add.
substantially.
Yes, definitely.
So thank you so much for the question. As I mentioned, we in our funding criteria have included a specific quota for youth with disabilities to be funded among the people that have applied for funding. Rosario will also speak more about the work that we're doing with youth with disabilities and that we plan to do in the coming months to engage them. We will specifically also be looking at having youth panelists across all panels rather than having a dedicated and separated youth summit. As for Indigenous women and girls with disabilities, we will not have a session that specifically focuses on women and girls with disabilities during the GDS, but we will have one during the Civil Society Forum. And Rosario has been working with other colleagues on shaping that session. And as our intersectionality officer, she has had very much in mind the importance of including Indigenous women and girls with disabilities in this session. And Rosario, maybe I hand over to you
Yes.
to further expand.
Okay. Thank you so much, Greta. Yes, to reply the question about the participation of youth, especially Indigenous youth, I think what we are going to do, because we are now at the end of this year, but we are planning to do between January to March, is having like a series of webinars dedicated to youth, especially first because we want to prepare like a youth call to action. But a part of the youth call to action with specific priorities for youth with disabilities, including also Indigenous youth with disabilities, we are going to collect the inputs of youth to contribute for the final declaration, because we have a final declaration in all the global disability summits. And we want to have with this the twin track approach. I mean, a specific call to action for youth with disabilities with references to Indigenous and other marginalized groups, and as well the inputs of youth with disabilities in the final declaration. We are also going to empower youth with disabilities, especially the ones who will be selected, because now they is in the selection process. As soon as we know who will be selected for that, we will be having different meetings with them in order also to prepare them for maybe moderating or being panelists in the different roundtables and panels in the Global Disability Summit. We will be also collecting other kind of inputs from different groups, especially youth, Indigenous youth, also uh, refugee youth, and all other groups about youth, because we consider that it's very important to promote the participation of youth, because especially because now in the recently approved document of the Pact for the Future, which was the outcome of Summit of the Future event, we have two specific references to youth with disabilities regarding enhancing the participation of youth with disabilities. And this is something that is a document which was signed for all governments, and that's why governments also have responsibility to ensure the participation of youth with disabilities. And that's why also we are doing this webinar also to hear the voice of Indigenous youth with disabilities and Indigenous persons with disabilities as well. Regarding women with disabilities, as Greta mentioned, we don't have any specific session about that, because we consider also that this is something that we need to mainstream in the whole session. Gender is something that we need to be mainstream in all the sessions. That's why it's very important to do that. Maybe for previous GDS, we try to do like specific sessions for women, but now I think we are in the time in which we need to mainstream gender, especially gender and disability, in all the sessions. I don't know if there's any other question regarding this, because this is something that we are planning to do, and I will be happy to answer any other question, not only here, but also you can send an email to me. Maybe Greta, you can put my email in the chat, because as Greta mentioned, I am the Intersectionalities and Cross Movement Collaboration Senior Officer, and I will be happy to answer all your questions here and by email.
Thanks, Rosario. I don't see any other hand raised or questions in the chat box, so maybe we can go to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of you for your questions. And now we are going to continue with this webinar, talking about some reflections on the past engagement in Global Disability Summit 2018 and 2022. The problem is that I know that we have two speakers, but Ipul Powasu, she's sending me a lot of messages because she tried to join the meeting, but it seems to be that she has a lot of problems with connectivity. That's why I think unfortunately, I think we are not going to have her. I try to tell her that maybe she can connect with other device, but this is also a challenge for indigenous person with disabilities because the connectivity is not good, especially in rural areas, and especially in the Pacific, where she is living in Papua New Guinea. That's why we would like to have her participation, but it seems to be it's not possible. She sent me recently a message. She's trying to enter, but it seems to be that it's not possible for her for connectivity. But we have now, I think Pratima is with us. Maybe if we are not going to have EPUL, it will be great important for us, but maybe also we can listen from Pratima also something that we expect from EPUL. We were talking about also challenges and opportunities for indigenous persons with disabilities in previous GDS and also in this GDS. Well, I would like to introduce first Pratima Guru. Pratima is an academic activist from Nepal. She has advanced intersectionality in the disability rights movement, linking advocacy to issues like climate change. She serves as General Secretary of the Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network. And please, Pratima, I would like to hear from you these challenges and opportunities for engagement in GDS 2018 and 2022 in Asia. But maybe if you can, we have people here. Okay. I don't know. Maybe what I want to do is try to introduce Ipul as well. I hope Ipul can listen us. Ipul, can you listen to us? Because I'm going to introduce you. I was introducing Pratima first, but because you have connectivity issues, I prefer to introduce you first and then go with Pratima. Could you hear us, Ipul?
Yes, I can hear you now. Just come online.
Okay, okay. Okay, Ipul. Just to mention that Ipul Powasu is a leader in disability advocacy in Papua New Guinea. She has over 25 years of experience in socioeconomic research and global disability representation. She played a pivotal role in PNG's ratification of the CRPD and establishing provincial disability networks. Okay, Ipul, the floor is yours to talk about challenges and opportunities for indigenous persons with disabilities in the Pacific or in previous engagement in GDS. Thank you so much, Ipul.
Thank you, Rosario. In terms of previous engagement, I have actually not attended the 2018 and the 2022 GDS. And there has not been, to my knowledge, a regional consultation in the Pacific. There may have been, but I have not been made aware of. So in terms of the GDS and its consultation, I am in the dark about all this within the region. But all I could say is that there is a need for voices of indigenous people with disabilities in the Pacific because of to be presented at the GDS because of the issues that we are facing in terms of climate, issues of climate change. There are also issues of the cultural perception towards disabilities, which is actually impacting in my country indigenous people with disabilities in relation to sorcery-related violence because of the perception that disability is a curse or, it's a punishment. And so when someone, there are anecdotal stories which is coming out from the work that I am doing here under the PNG Women Lead Program, we are hearing stories where people with disabilities are accused of sorcery. And so they are being killed, but this is not actually being reported. And that is an issue that we are facing in Papua New Guinea. In the region, in terms of the Pacific Island countries, the issue of climate change, it's affecting, displacement of indigenous people with disabilities. And the issue of the displacement is that issues of accessibility, issues of even exclusion, being left back on the island. And the issue of accessibility for me as a person with disabilities from an indigenous community, I live out of the village. I'm in the city, but I cannot go back home because I cannot be able to, the shorelines is eroded. So it is difficult for me, particularly using a wheelchair and moving around. So these are some of the issues that we really need to bring to the fore in terms of discussions around indigenous people with disabilities. We talk about disability per se, but we are not actually addressing the specific issues that indigenous people with disabilities are facing in their local communities because of the issue of isolation, impact in terms of not accessing education also contributes to economic exclusion, economic loss for people with disabilities, indigenous people with disabilities. And so I guess the reason that we need to be at this the GDS forum is to really bring our issues to the forefront. And, when we are discussing about disability issues, we also need to be specifically talking about the issues facing indigenous people with disabilities, as real issues that we are faced with. So I guess that is what I could bring to the discussion tonight, and to look at how best in terms of commitments, looking at collaborative approaches where we will need to see how our issues are integrated into the regional policies, but as well as our national policies. Because I've looked through, in Papua New Guinea, I've looked through particularly in the area of climate change, there seem to be a little around integration of issues faced by indigenous people with disability, but more so people with disabilities. So these are issues, some of the issues that around the Pacific Island countries we are faced with. And in Papua New Guinea, which is the biggest country in the Pacific, there are multiple issues that we are faced with. And so I guess I will leave it at that, and we can further deliberate on what are some of the commitments that we can make in our further discussions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ipul. Very important your participation, and also thank you so much because I know that it's almost 11 p.m. in Papua New Guinea. Thank you so much for attending this webinar and for talking about issues regarding Pacific region, especially regarding indigenous persons with disabilities and indigenous women with disabilities, because you have a very extensive experience in gender and disability. Thank you so much.
Rosario, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you. I see our colleagues from logistic have their hand raised, so I just want to make sure that
Okay. No,
everything is
it's okay. Okay. Okay, please, Maria. Thank you so much, Greta, for letting me know.
Hi, sorry everyone, just to inform you that we have a Swahili language right now, and we are trying to make Nepali language work. Thank you. Okay,
thank you so much for the good news, because we have Swahili now on board, and also we're going to record in Swahili this session. Thank you so much. Well, and now we have Pratima, our next speaker. As I mentioned, Pratima is an academic activist from Nepal, and she had advanced intersectionality in the disability rights movement, linking advocacy to issues like climate change. She serves as General Secretary of the Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network. Okay, Pratima. Yes, maybe to keep discussing with you, but especially these challenges of opportunities and previous engagements in GDS for indigenous persons with disabilities, but in this case, particularly in the Asia region. Welcome, Pratiman. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rosario. Thank you, Greta, for your updates and introduction about the GDS. And thank you, Ipul, my senior elder, and gratitude to all of you. Indigenous greetings from Nepal. I'm Pratima Gurung, representing National Indigenous Disabled Women Association of Nepal. And I also represent myself as a General Secretary of the Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network. I would like to thank IDA for organizing this very, very historic preparatory meeting in prior to the summit, and that is primarily focusing on Indigenous people with disabilities. So for me, I will just highlight about some of my past experience being part of the GDS, but also try to look at the conversation in a very holistic and comprehensive way. First of all, I would like to share the GDS information on Indigenous people with disabilities perspective. And that perspective, I just want to focus on the first Global Disability Summit that was happened in 2011. And I was there to represent both in 2018 and 2022. 2022, it was in a hybrid form. And we were able to do a side event with the collaboration of Minority Rights International in the second GDS. So some of the issues of Indigenous people with disabilities in the second GDS was highlighted. This is where I just wanted to mention. Though my representation in the first and the second GDS was from an Indigenous people's representations, we were able to bring some of the issues and concerns about the Indigenous peoples. However, in terms of the issues, the collective rights of Indigenous peoples, the meaningful participation, the right to self-determinations, and the violence and the discriminations that Indigenous women and girls face within the disability movement, within the Indigenous peoples movement, within the private and the public sphere, that was not focused and brought into the discussion. The issue of climate change was pertinent at that time. However, we were not in a condition to discuss about the climate crisis during the first GDS and second GDS. And that is why we are here right now for preparing for the third GDS, where we are trying to see these critical aspects that is related with Indigenous persons with disabilities. And we are in a phase that we critically reflect ourselves, critically internalize ourselves, that how do we bring the meaningful participation, engagement, and also the issues of Indigenous people with disabilities in this global arena. So with this setting, the Global Disability Summit for all of us, including Indigenous persons with disabilities, is an opportunity for us. It provides a common platform. It provides it is a mechanism that brings a wide varieties of high-level stakeholders engaging and discussing in the disability inclusion with the government, the multilateral organizations, the private sectors, academia, and civil society organization, including persons with disabilities and Indigenous people with disabilities. But my concern is, how do we mainstream? How do we include the voices of Indigenous people with disabilities, who are 54 million and 28 million Indigenous women and girls with disabilities across the globe? If you look at Asia Pacific region, we are 45 million Indigenous people with disabilities who are living our lives in risk, poverty, and vulnerability. If you look at the climate change issue, the climate crisis is one of the very pertinent issues that has been impacting our day-to-day lives. So in this context, we generally see different kind of challenges for Indigenous peoples to be integrated, to be included in the global spaces like the GDS. The first one is about the normative framework. So what does that mean when it comes to Indigenous peoples? Because most often we find that Indigenous peoples and agendas are not highlighted. It's not been described with the situation, with the challenges that we face in our day-to-day life. So it is a very important, it is very critical to clearly outline in the outcome document of the third Global Disability Summit about the challenges that we face. First, as indigenous people, second, as a person with disability, and third, as a women or indigenous women with disability. So how do we bring these intersections? How do we link these intersections with our lived experience and the challenges that we face with the interface of climate crisis, with the interface of humanitarian risks and emergencies that drought, floods, fireside is happening day to day in our countries, and we are in a severe threat of our lives. So how do we bring that? So that is the first challenge that we face. So there should be the GDS outcome document should clearly outline and the member state commitment to ensure and the mainstream the rights of indigenous people with disabilities has to be clearly reflected. The second thing is about the common understanding about the intersectional identities and also the approaches. When we talk about intersectional identities and approaches, there are differences, irrespective of the sex, age, ethnicity, reason, religion, social and ethnic minorities. These groups are always left behind in the discussion within the disability movement, within the indigenous peoples movement, within the feminist movement, and within the overall state movement. So it is a very important time for us that how do we ensure a very safe, a collective, and enabling space to bring the voices of indigenous people with disabilities in all the arenas of the GDS. So I think the voices of indigenous women, indigenous youth with disabilities should not be left behind. The third part that I wanted to highlight is about the representation. I would like to highlight that the voice of indigenous person with disabilities should be the heart of summit. And what does it look like? And when we talk about the issue of indigenous peoples looking from a collective rights and right to self-determination, the representation from the nominating organization, from the representative organization is very critical and it is mandatory. So at the global arena, the Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network is a formal network which has a status of a disability caucus in the UN Permanent Forum on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We know as indigenous peoples across the region, due to many different structural, historical, and indirect discriminations, we are not able to be registered. We are not able to have a formal organization like a OPDs or like a indigenous peoples organization. That is why the nomination of indigenous peoples should be very critical. And what does it look like is we want the representation of indigenous peoples to be the core values and principle of indigenous peoples' values, principles, and philosophy and indigenous worldview. And what does it look like is it is through their representative or the focal person who nominates the representation of indigenous peoples, because we do not want indigenous peoples who are not aware about the movement, who are not aware about the global indigenous peoples context, where the indigenous identities in different region, in different countries across Asia is not legally recognized by the state. And in this context, it is through the indigenous peoples organization, or it is through the focal person who can have and who can nominate the meaningful participation of indigenous people with disabilities in this summit. The third thing that I wanted to highlight is about having an open conversation. The issues like underrepresented groups, the issues of the emerging issues like conflict and crisis, disaggregated data, inclusive budgeting. So these are very critical issues and concerns for indigenous people with disabilities. And this is where I think in all the discussion, indigenous peoples have to be part of this discussion. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight is about this Global Disability Summit is creating a collective opportunity, a collective engagement of indigenous peoples with all the stakeholders, with all the organizations of people with disabilities. So for us, it is very critical that we need to have the side events, in the CSO side events, in the exhibition space, in the fireside chat, prioritizing the issues of indigenous peoples with disabilities in a very formal and informal settings to discuss about what indigenous peoples have been facing, language barriers, intercultural approach, the rights to self-determination, collective rights, the indigenous values and systems, the colonized mindset and the westernized mindset of the individual notion. These are the very different things that we have. And this is where we say that we are unique to among other groups. So I think this conversation has to continue. The last thing that I wanted to highlight is the SHIDA General Recommendation 39. The SHIDA General Recommendation 39, which has more than 40 particular references on indigenous women and girls with disabilities. If we look at the Second World Conference outcome document of indigenous women, it also has more than 12 references, particularly focusing on indigenous women and girls with disabilities. The experience of violence, the experience of forced sterilization, the experience of discrimination within the private sphere. Apart from that, the structural and the historical colonized and westernized values and principles that we face as indigenous people with the assimilation, with the co-optation is very critical. And I think to discuss all these agenda, we really want that the member states, including my country, because my country also has done commitment. My government has done commitment in 2018, in 2022 also. So I think it is time for us to have a very, very safe enabling space, to have an open conversation sitting on the table on the issues that affect our lives. So we are looking forward to have further discussion with these challenges to create a common opportunities where indigenous peoples values, principles, and their issues will be documented and will further collectively have a collective voices and also collective advocacy for the member states to implement at the grassroots level, at the national level. So I think it's time for us to sit down collectively and to look at these opportunities, to look at the achievements that we have done since 2011, since the formation of the Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network. And it is also time to critically reflect on us to make an inclusive world for all of us. So I'll just stop here and I look forward having if I have any questions regarding it. Thank you. Thank you for providing me this opportunity and thank you for listening me.
Okay, thank you so much, Pratima, for these really important issues about intersectionality, representation, participation, and especially in the way in which all the indigenous voices need to be heard. Uh, Now I had a request from one of our speakers because now we need to go to a break, but I would like to ask Olga Montúfar because she is now in the Economic Conference of Latin America and the Caribbean about women. And I know that she is going to participate in this conference today, and she had to speak today. But I don't know if she's still okay. I think she's still in the meeting. I think what we are going to do is before going to the break, we are going to introduce Olga because she needs to speak now. And then we are going for a break, and then we are going to continue our participatory activities. Sorry for that because we are changing a little bit our agenda, but it's a request from one of our speakers. Okay, I would like to introduce Olga Montúfar. Olga is the president of the Network of Indigenous and Afro-descendant Women with Disabilities of Latin America and the Caribbean. She has vast experience in development, human rights, and disability policy at the Organization of American States, and the United Nations levels. Olga will be speaking about key recommendations for indigenous engagement, talking especially about the recommendations made by the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples. Olga, welcome, Olga. Please, the floor is yours. Would you listen to us, Olga? I know you have the interpretation. Just to mention that Olga will be speaking in Spanish for those who needs to change the interpretation language.
¿Ahí me escuchan mejor?
Hello,
Sí,
can you hear me
yes,
better?
we can hear you.
Sí, ¿me escuchan bien ahí?
Sí, sí, ahí te escuchamos bien.
Can you hear me?
Perdón, es que estoy en en el inglés, en la página de inglés.
Yes, we are listening to you.
Ah, perfecto. Muchísimas gracias y bueno, primero
Thank you
quiero
so much,
agradecer la
and
invitación
I would like
a
to thank you
Aida, a
for inviting
Rosario y a
me.
todos los que
I would
organizaron
like to thank
este
to
evento. La verdad
Aida,
me siento muy
Rosario,
emocionada
and
de estar con ustedes,
everyone
sobre
else. I'm
todo
very
hablar de
emotional,
los
very
principales
excited to be here
desafíos que enfrentamos las
to
personas
talk
indígenas
about
con
the
discapacidad y que
principal
deseamos poner en esta
challenges
cumbre
that
global. Bueno,
that
yo
we
me
have
disculpo
for
primero
the
también porque me
GDS.
encuentro hoy en la CEMAR.
I'm
Nosotros
right now.
estamos haciendo negociaciones precisamente en la conferencia
We're doing
regional de la mujer
negotiations
y
on a regional level
lastimosamente aquí hoy día
about
solamente hay dos mujeres
women with
con discapacidad.
disabilities.
Una servidora encuentra en Argentina, entonces tenemos mucho trabajo
So
hoy
we have a lot of
y
work
me disculpo
today,
por no
and
permitirles receso a ustedes. Pero
I'm
bueno,
sorry. I'm sorry
para iniciar me
for
gustaría
this.
empezar compartiendo algo que ya
To begin
comentó
with,
para
I
tema
would
que me
like to
parece
start
sumamente importante. Los datos estadísticos
add
en
something
relación a las
what Pratima
personas
mentioned.
indígenas con
When we
discapacidad,
speak about
no
the
contamos
statistic
con
data,
datos
when we
estadísticos
speak about
o
persons,
datos duros
indigenous people with
específicamente
disabilities, we
para
don't
saber
really
cuántas mujeres
count
o
on
cuántos niños con
those
discapacidad
statistical
existen.
data.
También no sabemos
We don't
exactamente
know the exact
cuántas
number.
personas
We don't
indígenas
know
con
how
discapacidad
many
se encuentran en
people with indigenous
educación, se
people
encuentran
with
estudiando
disabilities
o se
don't
encuentran
go to
laborando.
school, don't
Esta es
work.
una
This is
preocupación que tenemos desde hace
one of the
varios
biggest
años
worries that
y a pesar de que
we
se
have
ha
had
estado
since a couple of
impulsando
years back.
iniciativas para que
There are
obviamente
some
surjan estos
initiatives
datos,
to
ahora sí que la
have
urgencia.
these
Y
data
esto es principalmente porque
in order,
en los
and
estados parte
basically
generalmente no
because
han terminado de comprender cuál es el
somehow
mecanismo que se debe de seguir para decir o para
we don't know which are
atribuir
the
a las
mechanisms
personas
that we
que
need to
tienen una
follow
identidad
in
indígena y
order
quiénes son
to
verdaderamente personas con
to
discapacidad,
say that
ya que
someone is a person,
algunos países, por
indigenous
ejemplo,
person with
pongo
disability or person with
el
disability.
ejemplo de México,
I can give you an
hay
example
enfermedades
of
que son
Mexico.
consideradas
There are
discapacidades
diseases
y
that are considered
están
as
atribuidas o las
disability, and
categorizan
they are categorized
obviamente por la funcionalidad. Entonces,
by
en este caso,
functionality.
para los pueblos
Um,
indígenas, la pregunta
so in that case,
clave en los censos
for persons
estadísticos
with
es
disabilities,
saber si
the
hablas una lengua
key
indígena. Y en este caso,
question
muchas
is, do you know that
personas
you
con
speak an
discapacidad,
indigenous language? So a
por
lot of
motivos obviamente
persons
de
with
esta condición de discapacidad,
disabilities,
han tenido
because
que
of
emigrar
that
para
motive, they
tener
had
los
to
primeros tratamientos médicos.
immigrate
Y
to
por
have
supuesto
some
empiezan a perder
medical
parte de su
treatments.
lengua por, pues obviamente, tener esta oportunidad de sanación. Otro desafío que tenemos
Another
es la
challenge
libre
that we have
autodeterminación, principalmente de los
is
pueblos indígenas,
free
y que precisamente por este
self-determination of
autogobierno que
indigenous
nos rige
people
a
with
la mayoría de
disabilities.
los pueblos indígenas, tiene como una característica general
There
en
is
la
a
que las
general
personas
characteristic
indígenas con
that
discapacidad, al no ser
indigenous
personas
people with disabilities,
contributivas o personas que abonan a la autonomía de estos pueblos,
they don't
por supuesto que no
contribute.
encontramos la ciudadanía plena.
We cannot really
Realmente
get
es una
full
de las
citizenship,
dificultades
and this is one
mayores
of
que no da
the
cumplimiento a la convención,
biggest
porque nosotros no
difficulties
participamos de manera
because we
legítima
don't really
en todos
participate
los
in a
procesos, como por
legitimate
ejemplo
way
la
in all of
consulta
the
previa,
processes
libre e
of
informada, en la que deberíamos de ser parte
consultations
para que también obviamente se escuche nuestra voz
in
y
order
todas las acciones
for
que
our voices
haya
to be
dentro de
heard.
los pueblos indígenas, pues lleve esta consigna. En este caso también es
In this
importante
case,
mencionar que
it is also
nosotros
important to
tenemos
mention
un
that
desafío
we
por la
have
autonomía de los pueblos porque tenemos
a
sistemas
challenge
normativos
that
tradicionales
we have
en los que este
normative
sistema
systems that
normativo
are very
tradicional, que es un
traditional.
documento jurídico que indica cómo se rige la vida de la comunidad, no estamos
Legal
especificadas las
systems
personas indígenas con discapacidad
and
y mucho menos cuando
indigenous
se
people
es
with
una
disabilities,
mujer indígena con discapacidad.
they don't
Lo que
form
quiere
part of
decir
these
es
legal
de que la
systems.
ciudadanía
So it
plena
means that
está
full
coactada
citizenship
políticamente
is
desde origen. Y quizás
basically connected
en este sentido
to
podemos
the origin.
remontarnos, ¿verdad? al
And in that sense,
artículo 21 y 22
we
de la
can go back to the
Declaración de los
article
Pueblos Indígenas, en el
21
que
and
desde origen, cuando
22
nacen,
of
nos ven como personas
indigenous
sujetas de
people.
protección. Es decir,
When we are
no
born,
somos
we are
sujetas de derecho, pero sí somos sujetas de protección
somehow
precisamente de nuestra
subject
comunidad.
to
Y en
protection
ese
of our
sentido
own
es que
community.
nosotros no
And in
aparecemos
this
en los sistemas normativos
case,
tradicionales
we don't really
porque se
appear
nos
in
está protegiendo de que
normative traditional
nosotros pues
systems
podamos de alguna manera
because
evitar o eliminar
we
esas
can
barreras que
avoid
supuestamente
and
tenemos
eliminate
al
these barriers,
incorporarnos en la comunidad.
and we can
Sin embargo, pues obviamente ese es el
belong
desafío
to
principal
our
porque
community.
al ser nosotros limitados de cometer
We,
errores,
since
por
we
decirlo
have,
así, pues
we
obviamente
are
no
limited to
maduramos y
commit,
también no participamos
to make some
activamente dentro
mistakes.
de la comunidad.
That's why we cannot
Aquí hay
fully
un tema
participate
que
in
hemos
a
trabajado mucho y que
community.
incluso fue
There is one
presentado
topic that
justo
we have worked
en el
on a
informe
lot
del relator
that we also
especial,
presented,
el derecho al
and that is
territorio,
the
a la
special
tierra y
rapporteur,
territorio. Principalmente las
the
mujeres
right
indígenas con
or
discapacidad
for a
no
territory, to
somos
have a
sujetas de
territory.
este derecho. Y bien, los
Women,
pueblos indígenas somos
indigenous women
parte
with disability, we're not,
precisamente del
we don't have
territorio
this
y
right,
también vivimos dentro de esa biodiversidad o debemos de convivir dentro o
but
convivimos dentro de esa
indigenous women with
biodiversidad
disabilities, we need
existente.
to
Por eso lo
live
que comentaba Prátima en su
in the
intervención
community.
anterior es muy importante porque la justicia
It is
climática
very
no llega a
important
las
because
mujeres indígenas con discapacidad o en
uh,
general a las personas
climate
indígenas con
justice
discapacidad
doesn't really
porque precisamente no se nos
refer
da
to women
la
with
oportunidad de
disabilities
ser
because we don't
sujetas de
have
derecho a la tierra.
an opportunity
Otras
to
de las
own
necesidades
land.
principales que estamos enfrentando es
Another
que
challenge that
nosotros para
we are
alcanzar la
facing is
autonomía
that in
requerimos
order
de
to
apoyos
reach
y estos apoyos para la
autonomy, we
autonomía
need the
no
support.
existen dentro de
And
nuestras
they don't
comunidades.
exist in our communities.
Independientemente de que los espacios no
Independently
sean
of the fact
accesibles,
that
me
the
parece que
spaces are
tenemos un
not accessible,
desafío en
I
cuanto a
think
estos
that we
apoyos.
have
También
a
no se ha
some
considerado,
challenge
¿verdad?, que
in
las
terms of
mujeres con
this
discapacidad o más
support.
bien se nos ha visto más como mujeres asexuadas, lo que quiere decir que se nos limita precisamente la parte de
Women
poder
with disabilities, they
nosotros ser
have,
sujetas
they're
del derecho a
limited
maternar y que los derechos
to
sexuales y
have to be
reproductivos en este sentido
to
se
have the
ven
right
afectados.
to be mothers,
Pero también cuando nosotras podemos tener o
but
decidimos tener
also
hijos,
when we decide to
¿qué
have a
hace
child,
falta?
what
La
is
asistencia, ¿verdad? El
necessary.
acompañamiento para
We
que
need
nosotros
some kind of
podamos
assistance,
tener
some kind of
el apoyo para poder cuidar
we
también.
need to be
Entonces,
accompanied
esta es
in
una
order
parte de
to
una agenda
make
muy
this
importante que
possible.
se está
So this is
llevando a
part of a
cabo y en
very
la que
important
hemos
agenda
estado
that is
trabajando muy
being
fuertemente,
undertaken, and
porque finalmente,
because
aun cuando daba miedo de que
finally,
era un tema
even when
de ver a las personas
we
con discapacidad sujetas solamente del cuidado, hoy
were
día estamos
afraid
hablando
of
que
that,
nosotras
now
podemos o
we are
nosotros podemos cuidar de
talking about the
otras
fact that
personas.
we can actually
Vemos
take
que la
care of
justicia
other
se ha
people.
visto, la
We
justicia
can
en
see
general
that
se ha visto
justice in
relegada para
general
nosotros, no
uh,
solamente por la capacidad jurídica, sino
didn't
porque
really
no
get to
existen
us
protocolos, no
because there
existen
aren't
fiscalías que puedan atender
protocols
en cuanto a la
uh,
perspectiva intercultural de las personas
when it comes
indígenas con
to
discapacidad.
um,
En este caso, por ejemplo,
intercultural
una mujer que se
perspectives.
presenta, una mujer
In this case,
indígena con
an
discapacidad que fue violada y que
indigenous
se
woman
presenta a los tribunales, hasta hoy día
who
todavía
comes
tiene
to
limitados los ajustes de los
who goes
procedimientos
to court,
que realmente podrían ayudar a que esta
there are
persona
some
pueda realmente
procedures
demandar.
that
Independientemente
can
de que
help
nosotros,
this
como
person
ya
to
mencioné
really
inicialmente, nos
sue.
enfrentamos primero a nuestro sistema normativo
We are actually
tradicional y
facing
claro,
a
al acotar
traditional
toda
normative
la
system,
cuestión interna, pues obviamente nosotros requerimos
and
salir a la
obviously
justicia externa en caso de que
we
no
really
haya
want
una
to have
resolución
a
del conflicto.
external justice if we
Me parece
cannot
que también aquí
resolve our conflict
preservando
internally. We continue
se
to
continúa preservando la
preserve
esterilización forzada porque se cree en la familia que el esterilizar a una mujer
forced
principalmente
sterilization
cuando se tiene una discapacidad intelectual o psicosocial
because
se
it is
considera
considered
que
that
es
when
la
a woman
mejor
has some
garantía para que supuestamente no sufra la
psychological
persona. Sin
disability,
embargo, me parece que esto es realmente todavía un desafío que tenemos que
this is
enfrentar
a challenge
o que
that
enfrentamos
we
porque
need to that we are
ciertamente
still
es
facing
necesario empezar
because
a
simply it
revisar
is
cómo se están ocupando
necessary
incluso términos
to
que no
revise
pareciera que no son agraviantes,
what
pero que finalmente
what
son
is the
términos que
terminology,
inducen a la esterilización. O sea, es
because
decir,
there are some
dicen que
terms
se
that
van
induce
a operar en apéndice
sterilization
a las niñas o a las mujeres y
because they
resulta que
say they're going
terminan
to
esterilizándolas.
operate
Creo que
appendicitis
esto es
of
algo que
some
tenemos
girl
que
or
poner muy en pie porque incluso
or
me
woman,
parece que no
but in
solamente
the
es un
end
desafío en
it's something
cuanto a
different, the
las mujeres
sterilization.
indígenas con discapacidad,
Um,
sino también las mujeres
it's not
con
only
discapacidad de la ciudad.
it's not only
En cuanto a los derechos
subject,
laborales,
not
todavía
only
no
indigenous women
terminamos
with
por
disabilities
comprender
are subject to this,
que los
but
derechos
other
laborales
women with disabilities.
también se pueden
When it comes
ejercer
to
viviendo en una comunidad
some work,
indígena.
let's say working
Tenemos que
conditions,
buscar, claro,
we need
otras
to
formas de poder
find other
ejercer este
ways,
derecho,
other methods
otros
in order to
mecanismos,
exercise
pero
these
finalmente
rights, other
existe
mechanisms.
la
But
posibilidad de
finally,
ejercerlo. Y bueno, lo digo porque
the possibility
generalmente estamos
exists
pensando
to
que cuando
exercise
hablamos del
this.
derecho al trabajo,
When we speak about
se
the
piensa que las
right to
personas
work,
debemos de estar en una
it is
empresa o
thought
que
that
tenemos que estar en
um,
una oficina. Y en
people with
una
disabilities, we
comunidad
have to be
indígena,
in a
por supuesto que
company
no
or
vamos a
in an
encontrar estos
office.
espacios y
And in the
tampoco vamos
indigenous
a
community,
poder
we are
tener
not going to
la
find
capacidad,
these
porque como ya lo
spaces and the
mencionó,
capacity
me parece
because
Pratima o Ipul, la
I
educación
think that
se ve
Pratima mentioned
limitada,
that the
especialmente
education
cuando
is somehow
somos
limited,
mujeres indígenas con
especially
discapacidad
when it
o
comes
niñas
to
indígenas con
in,
discapacidad.
indigenous
Me parece
girls
que
and
estos son
women with disabilities.
los puntos que a mí me
To
gustaría
my mind, these are
compartir.
the
Lo
points that
calco realmente
I
también
wanted to share
la
with you,
preocupación que comparte Pratima en
and
relación a
also
lo que
the
es el
worries
cambio
that Pratima
climático. La
has
justicia
shared.
climática
Yes, the
también es
climate
para las
change,
mujeres indígenas con
climate
discapacidad y niñas indígenas
justice
con discapacidad,
for
por lo
indigenous
que
girls
creo que es sumamente
and
importante
women
ponerlo,
with disabilities.
porque
It's very
finalmente
important to
en el momento en que
bear in
nosotros no
mind
ejercemos
because
esta justicia climática, todos los beneficios, por ejemplo,
if we
como la
don't exercise
alimentación,
this
la soberanía alimentaria,
climate
eso se
justice,
ve afectado porque la recolección,
also
pues obviamente ya no
the
está en los
alimentation,
lugares cercanos donde acostumbramos a hacerlo. Las plantas medicinales las
um,
estamos perdiendo
the
porque
food
el
and
cambio
everything.
climático está cambiando toda la
The
biodiversidad.
climate change
Entonces
is
vemos
changing
cómo
all the
siempre
biodiversity.
las cuestiones en cuanto a las personas que vivimos en poblaciones indígenas, siempre se
So
ve
all of the
con múltiples
people
agravios,
living in an
se
indigenous
duplica precisamente la
community,
discriminación y sobre todo se dificulta
for us the
principalmente el
discrimination is
acceso
doubled,
a
and we
estos
have
derechos
more
que
difficult access
generalmente en
to
las
these
ciudades como
rights
que intermedio,
that
¿verdad? No se están cumpliendo. Entonces, pues yo sigo
generally in
agradeciendo
cities
la oportunidad
they're
de que
more
me haya
accessible.
permitido participar y
Thank you
pues
very much for giving me this
agradezco
opportunity to
este tiempo que me escucharon
participate,
ustedes.
and
Muchísimas
thank you
gracias.
for the
Gracias
time
por
that you listen to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Olga, for raising these important issues, a range of different rights that are vulnerated, especially for indigenous communities. And especially, thank you for raising the issue of the care and support systems, because it's very important. As you mentioned, it's not only accessibility, it's not only reasonable accommodation. It's very important to have this kind of support systems in place. It could be personal support, it could be technology support, other kind of support. But it's very important to talk about this agenda and these issues, and especially about data collection and other things. Thank you so much, Olga. We are going to have a break because we need a break for our interpreters. Just 5 minutes break, but please don't go away. I mean, it's only for the interpreters. You can maybe have a drink one coffee and something like that, but because after, when we are going to return, we have our next speaker, Lauren Avery, and then we will be having like a participatory activity to discuss all about these issues that Pratima, Ipul, and Olga discussed today, in order to have maybe some possible engagement of Indigenous persons with disabilities during this GDS 2025. Okay, I don't know if before going to break, Greta, you have something. I know that there's someone who was writing in the chat, but it's about logistics issue, I think. But
Thanks so much, Rosario. I think there was an issue with the Swahili interpretation, but I'm sure our log colleagues are solving it.
okay, good.
So
Okay, thank you so much. Please, we will be having now a break of 5 minutes, but please don't go away. Stay here. Okay, thank you so much.
Unmute yourself. Hi, Rosario. This is
Yes.
Minya speaking in front of the webinar team. I will just use this opportunity to try to set up the Swahili interpretation, just for you to know
Okay.
that we are testing this
Yes,
now,
yes, yes.
okay?
Okay. Thank you so much, Minya, for letting me know.
No problem. Emmanuel, can you please confirm if you can hear us? We see that your microphone is unmuted, but we cannot hear you on any channel. Please, can you try to speak up on the Swahili channel? Or if you can confirm in writing if you can hear us or not. Okay, Emmanuel, you confirmed that you can hear us and that you responded, but we couldn't hear you. So can you please unplug your headsets if you have one and try to speak up without headphones? Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, you can try continuing the meeting without the headphones, okay? Did you hear me now? Is this okay? Okay. So for us, we can hear you now while you were speaking. We could understand clearly. So I hope that when the meeting starts, you will continue the interpretation. But it needs to be simultaneous interpretation. I don't know if that is okay for you. Did you understand this part? Perfect. Thank you. Amar, this is Minya speaking on Nepali channel. Can you confirm that you can hear us and that your interpretation is working? Mark, can you hear us? Are you with us? Mm-hmm. Yes. We can hear you now clearly, and from what I understood from colleagues, only Swahili was not working, so it's all good now. Okay. Thank you very much.
Rosario, just to let you
Yes.
know, I'm joining my, what do you say, because I was earlier using my laptop. Now my laptop is almost dead, so I'm attending as a participant. So if there is any question and concern for me, you can unmute me from the participant list, no?
So
Okay,
just
yes. What you can do is also, if you want to, maybe when we have a discussion and you want to intervene, you can raise your hand, and definitely Unlock is going
okay. So
to
I'm in the
activate your mic.
I'm in the attendees right now, not as a
Mm-hmm.
panel, not as a
Yes,
panelist.
yes,
So
yes,
I have to move from the panelist section just to let you know.
yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. Okay, yes, I understand completely. Okay. Okay, now we are going to start again, and thank you so much for this break, who allows us also to set up properly the interpretation in Swahili. I would like to now introduce our next speaker, Lauren Avery from Minority Rights. Lauren collaborates with disability rights activists from minority and indigenous communities globally. She holds multiple postgraduate degrees and is currently pursuing doctoral research in the University of York. Welcome, Lauren. The floor is yours. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Rosario. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you okay.
Perfect. So hello, everybody. My name is Lauren Avery, and I am the Disability Project Coordinator at Minority Rights Group, which is the leading human rights organization working with ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities and Indigenous peoples worldwide. Thank you very much to IDA, particularly to Rosario and Greta, for the invitation to speak today. And I would just like to acknowledge the continued collaboration between MRG and the Indigenous Peoples with Disabilities Global Network and their knowledge and leadership in this space. Also, thank you to Olga Montefort, who just spoke, and to Pratima for your words so far. So I will talk just briefly to you all about the previous work in the GDS and in the other spaces of collaboration between Minority Rights Group and other Indigenous people with disabilities organizations. And then I will talk briefly about commitments and how you can use commitments and the progress in commitments since the first GDS in 2018. And then I will just finish highlighting some points on collaborative working before passing the floor back to our participatory element. So earlier in 2024, Minority Rights Group collaborated with the Indigenous People with Disabilities Global Network and other Indigenous OPDs based at the national and local level to produce a submission to the report on the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Issues, which Olga was highlighting in her speech previously, on the situation of Indigenous people with disabilities. Since 2020, we have collaborated to submit various other reports, including to the MRIP study on Indigenous children in 2021, supporting Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network to engage with the Special Rapporteur on Disability at the Human Rights Council, and highlighting Indigenous disability issues in the treaty body councils of the United Nations, so including the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, CRC, and the Committee on the Rights of People with Disabilities, CRPD, through submissions for general recommendations and country reviews. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank many of you who've been involved in those submissions and with providing us with information. We've also organised multiple Indigenous and disability focused side events, including at COP, the Conference on State Parties on Climate Change, COSP, the convention, the Conference on State Parties to the CRPD, and the previous Global Disability Summits. At the last Global Disability Summit in 2022, MRG collaborated with the Indigenous People with Disabilities Global Network and IDA to organise an online side event, which was named Ensuring that Indigenous Peoples and Minorities with Disabilities are not left behind in COVID-19 recovery efforts. And speaking at that event was Manasino Tutu, Pratima Gurung, and Olga Montefort, who are also speaking here today. And we will also hopefully be applying for space for our Indigenous and minority disability activist partners to discuss some of these key issues that have been already discussed in this meeting at the GDS this year. So we're hoping to be able to support some attendance to that as well. So please do follow us closely for more information on that. So moving on to talk about the GDS commitments, which have already been mentioned, and Rosario has spoken a little bit about how important the commitments are. So the GDS does provide an opportunity to really push for commitments from your governments, from multilateral organizations, and from other civil society organizations to promote the rights of Indigenous people with disabilities. I really encourage you to approach states, whether that is your own state, as Pratima was saying, the importance of, for example, engaging the state of Nepal, but also to approach other states that might also be allied to your requests. Also, please do approach other civil society organizations and international aid agencies and ask them to make commitments to promote the rights of Indigenous people with disabilities. This can be done collectively or at a state level, depending on preferences and strategies, but I do really encourage you to work together on this as well. Of course, there are lots of different commitments that need to be made, and there are huge challenges facing Indigenous people with disabilities. But this could be around data collection, disaggregated data collection and research. We know that these are very important areas, but also around investments in healthcare, education, or inclusion in climate change and disaster risk reduction, just as a few examples. Commitments are a really great way to ensure that Indigenous people with disabilities are included in important conversations and policy-making spaces, and commitments, of course, last long beyond the Global Disability Summit itself, and are a way to hold these organisations to account long after the summit ends. So just to give some background to some of the commitments. In 2018, the commitments listed under the Charter for Change included just one reference to people with disabilities affected by multiple forms of discrimination, and there was very little mention of intersectionality or issues experienced by persons with disabilities from Indigenous or minority communities. To put it in context, a review of the final 968 individual commitments made by stakeholders in 2018, only 2 of them reference Indigenous peoples and 3 reference minority groups. So it really was a very low bar. Fortunately, this improved in 2022. The number increased dramatically as a result of coordinated advocacy efforts by Indigenous people with disabilities. And so congratulations to all of you who were involved in that. And then, of course, the support from stakeholders. So in 2022, there were 21 commitments mentioning Indigenous people with disabilities made by 16 organisations, including 3 national governments. Those were the United States, Sweden and Somalia. 2 multilateral organizations, UN Women and the World Food Programme. This is not including Minority Rights Group or IDA, by the way. I'm sure there are others as well. And that was out of 1,418 commitments. So there was a really big improvement in the attention that was paid to the issues of Indigenous people with disabilities between 2018 and 2022. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about collaborative working and the importance of building connections and continuing to build connections between yourselves and your organisations. So please do reach out to other organisations. There are also new organisations of people with disabilities working in this space who are quite isolated as well and who also want to connect with other organisations. So please do reach out to them and include them in these conversations and in these spaces. I also wanted to highlight the importance of using your representative organisation, so the Indigenous People with Disabilities Global Network, for example, and the regional coordinators of these networks. and the importance of their role in the selection and nomination of Indigenous peoples who are occupying spaces, as Pratima was saying, as she spoke earlier. And I would also encourage you to really support the Indigenous People with Disabilities Global Vision to reach all regions and establish focal points, including in South America. Finally, if we can get as much Indigenous representation at the GDS as possible, then there's much more opportunity for networking and strengthening this global movement. But also, I want to recognize that GDS is not the only platform that this can happen. It is just one mechanism that can be useful in this ongoing struggle. But also remember that organizations such as International Disability Alliance and MRG can help to promote this collaboration and stand behind you. But of course, that it is essential that the leadership does come from you, from Indigenous people with disabilities. So I think that's about all from me. Do let me know if you have any questions and feel free to reach out as well. I can, share my information, or Rosario, feel free to also share my information with anyone who requests it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you so much for also talking about commitments, how this evolved from 2018 to 2022, and hopefully we will be having more commitments from stakeholders regarding Indigenous and other minority groups. I know, to be honest, it's really very, I am surprised because time flies a lot. I mean, when we start to structure our session, we think that maybe 2 hours could cover a lot of things, but I really noticed that definitely 2 hours is not enough to talk about Indigenous issues, especially if we want to hear other voices from the audience here. But I would like maybe before passing the floor to Greta with the commitments and then to Manasseh, I would like to maybe request 2 or 3 comments, and maybe you can put in the chat some ideas about how we can maybe have like an impactful engagement of Indigenous persons with disabilities in this GDS 2025. I think Pratima and Olga and Ipul mentioned different things that we need to take, for instance, climate change and everything. And also Lauren mentioned things regarding the possibility to have maybe side events. And maybe you have any other ideas about what kind of strategies we can use in order to engage more Indigenous persons with disabilities for the GDS 2025. I am not thinking only in person, because for in person, we will be having maybe the selection process at the end of this year, but I am thinking about other ways to definitely participate. I don't know if you have any ideas. Maybe you can put in the chat or in the Q&A, or if you maybe want to raise your hand, feel free to do that. I can take 2 or 3 comments at the most and then proceed with our agenda.
Rosario, just to let you know, there are some comments in the Q&A box. They were mainly coming in during Pratima's remarks, and there were also a few expressions of thanks to Pratima for her remarks. There are a couple that I think we can address later when we speak about commitments. There is one which I think addresses your question now, so I will read it out. Okay. There's a comment which says, when it comes to Indigenous women and girls with disabilities, our participation is invisible. Data comes from local and national level and to the regional and global level. So they are asking to ensure participation and to showcase issues also within emergency and humanitarian conflict. So this is the main comment, Rosario.
Okay, Greta, thank you so much. I think just to comment on that, yes, definitely. I mean, it's very important to be visible in different spaces, but I know that it's very difficult, especially for lack of funding. I mean, I know that I would like to fund all women with disabilities to participate in different events, but it's not possible because we have also our donors and they have also restrictions for some regions. But I think now there are other ways also to participate in these spaces. Maybe sometimes there are campaigns in social media. Sometimes they are also collecting some inputs on. Sometimes they are also doing some hybrid events in which maybe it's possible to participate online. But we are also aware that there are a lot of challenges for Indigenous people who lives in the communities because I mean most of the times there's no internet connectivity there. That's why maybe we need to create solutions that could be maybe more participatory for Indigenous persons with disabilities. That's why we are also here to listen from you, to read your comments about that. But yes, I mean, just to put an example of that, Olga told me in the chat that she's participated in the Latin American Conference of Women, and there are only 2 women with disabilities, and she is the only Indigenous women with disabilities there. That's why this is very important. I mean, what is important to be visible, but at the same time, it's very important maybe to explore other opportunities to get funding and also to talk with the governments in order that governments consider have Indigenous persons with disabilities in their delegations, which is really difficult, but maybe we need to try to push for this commitment of governments now in the GDS. Okay, is there any other comment, Greta, in the chat?
Thanks, Rosario. There's a comment or question rather about refugee people with disabilities being represented at the GDS. Then there's a comment from Kamran saying that Pratima is right and that they experience a similar situation in Pakistan due to crisis and how people with disabilities struggle due to poverty, medical issues, and no employment. And there's also another remark sharing how in Manipur, India, bordering with Myanmar, Indigenous people with disabilities face multiple challenges in getting a form of identification for themselves. And due to this, they are not able to receive any kinds of social protection benefits.
Yes, social protection also is a very important issue. I mean, in all the regions, especially the governments need to make commitments about how to change these schemes of social protection in order to incorporate persons with disabilities and Indigenous persons with disabilities as well. Thank you so much for these reflections. I mean, for the question about refugees, Greta, do you have any answer about that regarding GDS?
Yes, thank you, Rosario. So indeed, we are also including refugee people with disabilities in our planning. It's of course much more challenging to plan for attendance of refugees with disabilities at the GDS, as oftentimes having the documentation and visa is an incredible challenge in terms of travel, and it is not something that as IDA we are often able to overcome. We will be planning a webinar for refugees with disabilities with Rosario, as we do want to make an effort beyond the physical participation. When it comes to participation of this group. We'll also have a session on situations of conflict and crisis during the Global Disability Summit, which of course will be looking at how refugees with disabilities are included and the perspective of refugees with disabilities. Thanks, Rosario.
Thank you so much, Greta. Maybe for the person who raised this issue, maybe if she can have contacts with refugees people, maybe it would be great that she can send an email to Greta and I, providing some contacts, and when we are going to plan this webinar, definitely we need to contact these people to include them. Okay, thank you so much, Greta. And I think we can maybe go with the session about commitments. And I would like to invite first, again, Greta to talk about why commitments matter. And then I will give the floor to Manasseh. But first, Greta, please talk about the commitments, why they are important.
Thank you, Rosario. I am speaking and I am muted. Thank you so much for giving me the floor again. I think we heard already a bit from Lauren and from Pratima about commitments and the importance of commitments. So I will try and frame what commitments are a bit more and how advocacy can be done around the submission of commitments. Commitments are at the center of what the Global Disability Summit stands for. And the commitments mechanism of the Global Disability Summit offers a platform for different actors, meaning governments, international organizations, the private sector, and so on, to make formal and actionable pledges to advance disability inclusion. Commitments can be financial, can be policy-driven, can be programmatic, and they shouldn't be symbolic gestures. Lauren mentioned how we received a lot of commitments for 2018 and 2022, and what we noticed is that a lot of them are empty promises, if you may. And so what we are striving for 2025 is that we may get less commitments, but the commitments that we do have are tangible, so measurable actions that will be implemented and that respond to a concrete gap or a concrete need. We are trying to do so, first of all, by having a technical review of commitments that we receive. So every time we receive a commitment on our commitments platform, and I will link it in the chat once I am done speaking, we have a reviewing committee that looks at the language of the commitment and ensures that the commitment is aligned with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So, of course, we want to make sure that we don't receive commitments that have language, for example, on segregation, on institutionalization, and so on. And also that the commitment is a smart commitment. So it's a commitment that is measurable. It's a commitment that outlines a concrete action. It's a commitment that quantifies how much time and how much money will be dedicated to achieve that specific commitment. We're also asking the stakeholders to tell us how many people with disabilities they plan to reach with that commitment. If they are including underrepresented groups, so if they are specifically targeting a group of people with disabilities, and if they have consulted with this group in the drafting of their commitment. And then we're asking them by when they think the commitment will be achieved. So to give us a time frame for implementation. We're also encouraging the submission of joint commitments. So commitments that are submitted by more than one actor. Ideally, we would like to see cooperation from actors from the Global South and the Global North. But also, for example, from a member state and a UN agency. And most importantly, we would really like to see joint commitments that are made with OPDs. So commitments that are submitted and are drafted jointly with OPDs. And the platform that we have built allows for this type of exercise to happen. So the GDS commitment portal offers a discussion space for networking and idea sharing. And it also offers an option for team collaboration between different organizations so that an agreement can be reached before the commitment is submitted jointly. The last aspect that I would like to highlight is that advocacy from OPDs in this sense can really make a difference, and that localized action can make a difference. Meaning, we do understand that an OPD from a rural context or from a small settlement may not be able to reach their government entity, their national government, and ask them to submit a commitment. But a commitment doesn't necessarily need to be submitted by a ministry. It can be submitted by a small local entity, a local authority, and that commitment can also help make a change. And a commitment that is submitted by a local authority is much easier to follow up on when it comes to the monitoring and implementation of the commitment. As IDA, we have worked on an advocacy toolkit, which includes a lot of key messages on how to communicate about the Global Disability Summit. And that also includes a template of a letter that can be used to ask for a government or a local entity to submit a commitment, and that can support you in advocating for this type of action to happen. I'll also put this resource in the chat box, and maybe Rosario, I give the floor back to you for now.
Okay, thank you so much, Greta. I know that it's a lot of information about commitments, and maybe we need to have like maybe another webinar, but I
Muchísimas
think
gracias, Greta,
what you
por
can
todo
do
lo
is
que ha
just to
dicho.
leave your questions here
Quizás
in the
podemos
chat.
tener
We
otro
will have them
webinario para
answered by
discutir.
email. And also, you want to approach directly to us, to Greta and I, we'll be very happy to reply all your questions. Okay, and now, in order to keep talking about commitments, but more specifically, talk about commitments that need to be done by stakeholders regarding issues corresponding to Indigenous persons with disabilities. I would like to introduce our last speaker, Manasseh Tutu. Manasseh is an advocate for Indigenous persons with disabilities in Kenya. He is the president of multiple grassroots networks, and he has been involved in CRPD SDG advocacy since 2016, and he's the co-chair of the Indigenous Persons with Disabilities Global Network. And Manasseh, just to maybe I would like that you can reflect more about, is it possible to do like a call to action, maybe to encourage other stakeholders to make commitments regarding Indigenous persons with disabilities, and what kind of commitments maybe they need to do or are necessary to be done. Thank you so much, Manasseh. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Mm, are you here, Manasi? Sorry, I saw you in the participants. So I don't know if.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
Greta.
don't see Manasseh Rosario at the moment. I don't know if he dropped from the call.
Yes, she also had. He also had connectivity issues. Okay, but maybe Pratima, if you are still there, because I remember that you mentioned that you will be as participant, you can raise your hand to use the mic. Maybe if you can maybe answer this question about what kind of commitments you think that stakeholders need to do to maybe take these concerns of indigenous persons with disabilities. Are you there, Pratima? Is if maybe if Pratima is not there, I know that Ipul dropped the meeting because she had also connectivity problems. Maybe, I mean, this is an open question for everyone who wants to write something in the chat. Because, I mean, we heard a lot of things from Pratima and from Olga about the need to have data collection. We heard about the need to have like a care and support systems. But maybe how we are going to translate this in commitments. But Pratima, you are there. Yes, can you raise your hand and maybe the logistic team can put your mic on? Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, Pratima.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for us is you have also highlighted about one of the things that the stakeholders from the global level to the regional level and to the grassroots level could do, and the member states, it is the mandate of the member states to be comply with all these human rights mechanism, including the UNCRPD, the CEDAW, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So from that perspective, I would say that the concluding observation of the CRPD that is been given to the different member states, including the government of Nepal. So I think that could be one of the entry point for implementing the laws and policies at the grassroots level or at the national level. So that could be one of the a very, very important aspect that we would like to highlight that all the stakeholders need to integrate. The second thing is about the disaggregated data. So when we talk about disaggregated data, the data should be from the disability, the age, sex, caste, and ethnicity, and geography. So these are the very fundamental things that we need to highlight because this also links with the SDG, leaving no one behind. So if we talk about leaving no one behind and reaching the farthest far, I think indigenous people, including the other minority groups within people with disabilities who are not able to amplify their voices, whose agenda are still been left behind. So I think it's not only including indigenous people, but when we look at from this disaggregated perspective, it will also include other marginalized groups, including at the LGBTIQ communities. So this is second thing that I wanted to highlight. The third thing is there should be a targeted kind of programs and policies that should be highlighted to the underrepresented groups. So the Global Disability Summit has to come with the reference document that the International Disability Alliance has made. The definition of who is underrepresented groups, I think that underrepresented groups definition should be very clearly mentioned. And that is again linked to the next, what do you say, the earlier um, um, the earlier informations that I provided, because that will clearly highlight about people having severe disability, people with psychosocial disability, people with deaf blindness, including indigenous people and women with disability. So I think the third one would be very practical, that there should be a dedicated focus and priority to these underrepresented groups. The fourth one I would say is about the meaningful participation and engagement of these indigenous people with disabilities at the country level, at the regional level, and at the global level. And finally, that I would say is the understanding of disability, having a common agreement as a disability is an evolving concept. There has been so many updates that has come with the CRPD general comment. So I think the understanding of disability from a wider perspective has to be the part of discussion at the national level, because the laws and the policies that are made at the national level is still in the medical approach. So the government, on the one hand, we are talking about CRPD, we're talking about human right based approach. But if you look at the national level laws and policies and the disability card that is being provided at the national level, that is conflicting. And this is where the government is still looking people with disabilities as from a medical aspect. They are still looking people with disability from a charity based approach. And we are demanding as a right-based approach. This is where the paradox is. That is why the last point is that there should be an understanding of what does that human right-based approach mean. And when it comes to providing social protection, the quotas, the reservations, and in that regard, the government should provide all these services in a right-based approach rather than in a medical or a charity-based approach. I think these are the commitments that we can really reinforce to not only to the government, but even to the development partners, to the academia, and to all the multi-stakeholders, and make it our collective issues, not only for indigenous peoples, but also for other marginalized groups within the disability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pratima. Thank you so much for raising these very important issues, especially about concluding observation, about the data collection, but also about this common understanding of disability, as evolving concept. Because, as you definitely all of us are aware that most of our governments don't have this conception of disability. They see us as part of the medical and charity models. That's why we need to, maybe in the commitments, we need to see if this definition of evolving concept is reflected or not in the commitments, in order to also create more spaces or to enhance meaningful participation. Thank you so much. We are now at the end of this webinar. Yes, we have different topics here. I think it would be really happy to have all of you as speakers, to have Ipul, Pratima, to have Olga, and to have Lauren. And unfortunately, Manasseh had connectivity issues, that's why he couldn't participate in this meeting. But thank you so much to all our service providers. Thank you so much to the logistics team. Thank you so much to Greta, to the GDS Secretariat, to Chagni for the communications, Alessandro. And just to let you know that we will be also scheduling some webinars for next year. Hopefully, we will be scheduling one more for Indigenous, because we consider that 2 hours are not enough to discuss more about that, to keep engaging Indigenous persons with disabilities in this conversation towards the Global Disability Summit. Thank you so much to all of you. Thanks, Greta, for your participation and collaboration. And thanks to all of you who attend this meeting today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rosario, and thanks to all of you who attended.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.